trust created in 1642 for the benefit of people in Thanet may still exist. The land exists. The obligation, if the trust subsists, still exists.
Welcome to Peace Unplugged. I'm joined today by David Peerless, who's been investigating some history locally, and he's been investigating the trust connected to it. We spent some time walking around the area together. That's been Birchington, Reculver and Sa, and today is really about understanding what he's found and how that fits into what's happening now.
See, I'm delighted to be here. Thank you very much for hosting.
We're walking through farmland in Thanet. You spent the last 18 months investigating. That's the story of a man who farmed the land from here nearly 400 years ago. How did you find him?
Well, my family has been in Birchington for 100 years, and I was born in Thanet. When I was about 8, my mother told me that one of the Cambridge colleges owned a lot of land in the area. And as an inquisitive child, I immediately asked why. And she didn't know the answer. That question stayed with me, unanswered for decades. About 18 months ago, with a planning application for 1,600 houses on this land, I decided to find out. Through the Birchington Heritage Trust, I found reference to a gentleman called Henry Robinson, who died in 1643. And I asked St. John's College for a copy of his will. To my surprise, they said they didn't have the original, only a 19th century copy, which they emailed to me. That was the beginning of this story.
So most people in researching history hit a wall pretty quickly. What made Henry Robinson's story different?
Well, yes. When I read the will, 2 things were immediately clear. First, that this was actually not a gift. Henry Robinson used the words in trust and confidence. He left his land to St. John's College as trustee, specifically to fund scholarships and fellowships for young people born here in Thanet and Kent. So the college was the trustee, not the owner. And second, the trust was designed to last forever. The word forever appears explicitly. Scholars were to be admitted from time to time. And so this wasn't a temporary arrangement. And so the immediate question was, to my mind, what happened to the trust?
So how did you continue to investigate, David?
Yeah, well, I asked the college a series of investigative follow-up questions. I asked them if the trust had ever been varied or terminated. I asked for a full set of accounts. And given that they didn't have the original will, the original trust instrument, I also asked how they met their fiduciary responsibilities without it. As the evidence grew, I guess the questions became more difficult for the college to answer.
And what does that mean?
Well, having been appointed trustee, the college did not have equitable interest in the land. It was supposed to award scholarships and fellowships to the people born in Kent or Thanet, in line with the terms of the trust. It has a fiduciary duty to those beneficiaries and was never supposed to profit from the land.
So Henry Robinson used the words trust and confidence in his will. Can you just explain the concept of that trust to our listeners?
Yes, of course. In fact, my 3rd YouTube video was exactly on this subject, because it is really important. Marty, think of a trust as a triangle. There are 3 parties, and each has a different role. First, there's the settlor, Henry Robinson. He is the most powerful person in the trust, because what he says prevails. in 1642, he owned the land. He owned both the legal title and the equitable interest in that land. And when he created the trust, that ownership, if you like, was split. The legal title went to the trustee, to St. John's College, Cambridge, who was responsible for managing the trust. A trustee has what is called a fiduciary responsibility. A trustee cannot profit from it, and his equitable interest went to the beneficiaries, the people born in Thanet and Kent. And the beneficiary class was entitled to scholarships and fellowships. So if the trust was never lawfully brought to an end, as the evidence suggests, then those obligations dating back to 1642 actually still exist.
So St. John's College confirmed they have no records of a single scholarship ever being awarded. How did you react when that was first established?
Honestly, it was one of those moments where you read something twice because you can't quite believe what it says. This wasn't buried in a footnote. This was St. John's College's formal response to a Freedom of Information request. They searched their records. No scholarships identified. No evidence of variation. No documented termination. A trust created to operate forever, to benefit the people of Thanet, and no evidence it ever functioned as intended, and no evidence that it was ever lawfully brought to an end. That is not historical curiosity. It's a really serious legal question.
Indeed, equity knows no time.
Yes, it's one of the maxims of equity. And what it means is this: unless there is evidence the trust was lawfully brought to an end, the will still prevails today. So a trust created in 1642 for the benefit of people in Thanet may still exist. The land exists. The obligation, if the trust subsists, still exists. And Henry Robinson was thinking about the future of this community nearly 400 years ago. And we are still asking whether his intentions have been honored. Marty, imagine, if you will, over almost 400 years, if more people born in Thanet had had the opportunity to attend top universities on scholarships, could that actually have made a difference to Thanet and its economy over those 400 years?
As I understand it, the judicial review is against Thanet District Council. How does that work?
Well, and that really is a very good question. And you're absolutely right. The judicial review is against Thanet District Council. St. John's College, Cambridge is one of the interested parties. So let me explain. While we were asking St. John's College about the land, we asked related questions to Thanet District Council in order to ascertain what due diligence they had done before awarding planning permission. And it transpires that St. John's College didn't tell the council how it came to hold the land, and that Thanet District Council didn't ask. And coincidentally, neither did the planning inspectorate. Thanet District Council argued that they don't have to check land ownership. Then they said they would only do so if they were notified. So we notified them. And as it happens, we now have evidence via the ICO, and so it is in the public domain, that the planning inspectorate expects them to. Therefore, in simple terms, in our view, Thanet District Council failed to conduct obvious due diligence, especially when placed on notice, and therefore failed in their public law duties. Ultimately, though, that is the matter the High Court is being asked to decide at judicial review, and that process is well underway. So, if I may, I'll leave that bit there.
Yes, of course. Let's leave that. Let's leave that to the legal issues. So you can tell me a bit more about the review process itself.
Yeah, we can discuss the judicial review process. It's quite interesting. Judicial review actually they have a strict timeline. Within 6 weeks of the decision, not 6 months, 6 weeks, one has to apply for a judicial review. So in this case, planning permission was granted on the 23rd of December, 2025, the day before Christmas Eve. And I gather Birchington Parish Council received notification at 5:29 p.m. that day. People were already in holiday mode. So I don't think we really realized that had happened until Christmas Eve sometime. So over Christmas, while most people were with their families, I was writing a formal pre-action protocol letter setting out the grounds of challenge. I served it on the 29th of December. Thanet District Council responded a couple of weeks later. And then over the following month, I compiled a bundle of documents running to over 1,000 pages, along with formal legal grounds of challenge.
Wow, that's a lot.
Yeah, it's one of those things, honestly, you look back on and think, God, how did I do that? 1,000 pages crossing trust law, charity law, land registration law, planning law, formal High Court documents filed within a 6-week window. Then the other side has 3 weeks to respond. St. John's College served their response on the Tuesday. Thanet District Council left it until the Friday, lunchtime, giving me mathematically 3 days to respond or to reply to both. I completed the reply over the weekend, filed and served by 8 a.m. on Monday morning. Now, Marty, I'm not telling that story particularly to impress anyone. I'm telling it because the people on the other side have legal teams, solicitors, and resources. I had the evidence compiled over 18 months, and I used it.
You've clearly done a lot of work on this, and much of that work is being done on your own. What does that mean in practice?
Well, I've been able to engage support from others along the way. Since we went public about 3 weeks ago, the response has been amazing. Many people have been in touch with offers to help, with filming. The 4th video at Monkton Church was produced brilliantly by Richard Hetherington, a local producer, and we had support from the church itself. Stuart Hosper, who has volunteered at the church for some 40-odd years as organist, gardener, has now written some piano and violin music to commemorate Henry Robinson. And it's just wonderful to see the community of Thanet coming together. I've also been invited to judge the first Birchington Scarecrow competition on the 18th of April. And I'm looking forward very much to meeting people within the community and speaking to them about the significance of this. But yeah, during the research and investigation process, I did carry a lot of the complexity by myself. Others did send freedom of information requests, but while others may have been able to get an impression of some or many of the issues, I was probably the only one with perhaps the whole picture. Every legal argument, every FOI request, every submission, the research, the drafting, the filing, the follow-up. There's not much of a team. There's no solicitor managing this process. But what keeps it going is the evidence. When the evidence is strong, and in this case, I genuinely believe it is strong, the work sort of justifies itself. Every document that confirms the picture is another reason to continue. But I also want to be honest. I'm doing this for people who may not even yet know they may be beneficiaries. People born in Thanet and Kent. People who Henry Robinson intended to benefit 400 years ago. Most of them have never heard of it. Most of them have no idea this trust exists. And that is precisely why someone needs to pursue it. And that's precisely why I've gone public. and set up a GoFundMe. And I would, of course, greatly appreciate if people listening would support that.
Of course, please everybody donate. So you've set up a Facebook group, you've set up a beneficiary register, and you've got your YouTube channel as well. Can you tell me a bit more about each of those?
Yeah, of course. Should we start with Facebook? We went public on this about 3 weeks ago, and Facebook was the obvious place to start. And I'm delighted to say we have, I think, nearly 200 members of the group. It is a private group, and I've restricted it that way on purpose because of the legal proceedings that are ongoing in the background. But I would like to encourage everyone to join, everyone listening to this to join. And please, therefore, search for the Thanet Trust Association or follow the links that I hope you'll be able to find. The beneficiary register is actually really important. Henry Robinson awarded scholarships to people born in Thanet and Kent and educated at the King's School, Canterbury, from almost 400 years ago. That in its own right is actually quite a large beneficiary class. Today, about 15 or 16,000 people are born in Kent every year, including about 12 or 1,500 born in Thanet. The King's School, Canterbury, which has been around for 1,000 years almost, has more than 1,000 pupils. Therefore, it seems pretty absurd to me to suggest that no beneficiaries exist. But hey ho.
And they've said that.
They have. Personally, I find that difficult to reconcile.
Surely that's got thousands strong.
Yeah, I mean, that's what I think, Marty, and I don't think it takes a lot of imagination to come to that conclusion. But the register actually does two things, and this is important. First, it collects a list of people who might be direct beneficiaries in accordance with the strict terms of the will. A large beneficiary class in its own right. And also second, and this is important, it will demonstrate public interest and public standing. So the database that we've created is capable of segmenting the register in such a way that it can serve both purposes. And therefore, everyone who's listening to this, please do join the register. There's no cost to doing so.
So the YouTube channel, you created some really interesting videos, David.
Thank you. I'm really not a YouTuber, as you can probably tell. But I did think it was important to put a personal face on this. The purpose of a judicial review is to quash planning permission. And I know a lot of people would be supportive of that in the local community. And I genuinely hope we can achieve that. But incredibly, this is not just an issue about 1,600 houses. The people of Thanet and Kent are beneficiaries of a charitable trust dating back to 1642. Scholarships should have been awarded. Locals over generations should have benefited. That, I believe, needed explaining in a way that hopefully people can understand it. And I did think YouTube was a way to do that. And I hope this resonates with people because it's actually really serious. But I'm delighted by the response on the YouTube channel. The view statistics are pretty good. And I really hope we can build it from there.
Yes, maybe we can pick up on your comment about the implications. This really is not just about planning.
Absolutely. This really is not just about planning at this point. Had I not started digging around 18 months ago, trust created for the benefit of the people of Thanet would have continued to operate, or rather continued to fail to operate, without anyone asking why. Land held on trust for this community would continue to be treated as private property. planning permissions would be granted, developments would proceed. And the people Henry Robinson intended to benefit would remain unaware that they had any interest in this at all. And so, Marty, what is at stake is not just the history, it's the legal reality that sits underneath the history. And that reality, if the evidence supports what I believe it supports, belongs to the people of Thanet. I find it extraordinary that Thanet District Council, which is supposed to act for the people of Thanet, who are also potentially the beneficiaries of this trust, was negotiating a Section 106 agreement with St. John's College, Cambridge, to provide facilities to the people of Thanet using funds derived from land that may always have been held for their benefit. Personally, I find that very difficult to recognize. And I hope that people, if they begin to understand this, will not just support this because they don't want to see Birchington overdeveloped, but because of this apparent breach of trust. Marty, as someone who represents this community on Birchington Parish Council now, and congratulations on your election, what do you think?
Well, I've very much taken an interest in this, David. And this was clearly an issue that's been going on for some time. That over this piece of land, it did, to an extent, look like a bit of a lost cause to fight back, until I heard about yourself. I was introduced to you. Now, as far as I'm concerned, as a parish councillor, I've done there to represent the people of Birchington. This is a very, very important point. I'm very much about health and wellness. So about the surroundings of where people live in Birchington is important to their wellness, about their mental health as well, about the concerns and worries. I was speaking to somebody just a couple of hours ago who said, "Oh, I think I might sell my house because they're going to build on the land next door, and I'm not sure what I want to do." So it's clearly a worry. So so from that point of view, it say, regardless of whether anybody's in favour or not in favour of the housing being built, that aside of the way that's been planned out, as far as I'm concerned, I'm here to represent people's views on that point. So far, my experience of that is that the vast majority of people are against this development, and what's really sealed that for me is this knowledge about the Henry Robinson legacy and the trust agreement. And I see this as a very much as like regardless of what people's opinions might be, there is a rule of law that we need to follow here. And that's why I'm fully in support of what you're doing, as well as all the other things that, that Birchington is, as far as I'm concerned, Birchington's not just about the little, not minutiae, but elements of like the allotments and the parkland and the benches and other bits of grass area around. The health and well-being of the people of Birchington underpins the whole of that.
Absolutely, yeah.
So we were standing in an arable field. What connects that field to the landscape? David, how good to meet you again. Building again. So you were saying about there's an interesting kind of link with what Charles Dickens had written.
Well, that's right. Charles Dickens wrote Bleak House in Broadstairs, and that was all about a probate case from the 1800s that went on something like 100 years, Jarndyce versus Jarndyce. And it describes all of these issues and how trusts were dealt with through the legal system. And it was the precursor, or at least Bleak House, as I understand it, was the precursor to the Judicature Acts of 1873 and 5.
Right. This is Gore End Farm.
This is Gore End Farm, and the farmhouse was recently sold, as were the barns. The cottages beyond it, I understand, are still St. John's. The bungalows that you can see there, that plot was sold in the early 1970s, and those bungalows date from, if I remember correctly, 1971 or 2.
Right. So Gore End Farm forms part of the land that belonged to Henry Robinson.
Yes. Well, more than you might think. This land has been farmed continuously for centuries. But actually, though, it hasn't always been the same. At around the time of the First World War, when Manston Airport was being built, that's a subject for another day, but a railway line was built across here. I think from the point of the style across the railway line, through Quex and across to Manston. And I understand it was removed in the mid-1920s. And during my research last summer, I came across an Ordnance Survey map from 1921, I think it was, with it shown on it. But really, Marty, what has changed is who should benefit from this land. In 1642, Henry Robinson was explicit. This land was intended to benefit the people of Thanet. And that idea appears to have been quietly lost. And standing here, that loss feels concrete rather than abstract. And I know many people, as you've said, would feel further loss if that land were to be built on in the way that has been proposed, and a way that genuinely many locals have objected to vehemently for years.
Okay, so we were standing at Reculver. Now, most people know Reculver Towers. You brought me up there specifically for a reason. So why Reculver Towers, David?
Because in Roman times, the Wantsum Channel was several hundred meters wide, and Thanet was an island.
So here we're looking over to Minnis Bay, aren't we? Across this.
So about 3 miles in that direction is Minnis Bay. And what you can see here is what would have been the Wantsum Channel, which, as I understand it, was a few hundred meters wide, and would have extended, I guess, past the rapeseed that you can see here.
Yeah.
And so all of that would have been the channel. And in the distance, beyond it, you can see the tower of St. Nicholas Church.
So this is St. Nicholas of Wade Church. We were discussing earlier about the fact that St. Nicholas is called St. Nicholas of Wade because you could wade out from St. Nicholas across the Wantsum, heading towards Reculver.
Or Canterbury, I suppose.
I guess so, yeah.
Yeah.
Cool.
St. Nicholas being St. Nicholas at Wade, where somewhere near it you could wade across the Wantsum.
Right. And then as this dried up, it would become, well, it's kind of salt marsh anyway, isn't it?
Yeah, so what's left, you can see a bit of the Wantsum River now it goes that way, and then it sort of goes in that direction, and so it is now very, very minimal. But in the time of Henry Robinson, in the early mid 1600s, Thanet was still an island. It was the Isle of Thanet, and that's the area that he knew. It's quite a different word.
And his family owning that land.
So yes, I mean, the land that we've been researching and investigating over the last 18 months is from St. Nicholas and Birchington. Yeah, but he owned more land than that. He lived in Moncton, which at the time was bigger than Birchington, and he owned other land as well, towards Canterbury and so on and so forth.
You say you owned land near Canterbury as well?
I believe so, yes.
Right, okay.
And so the other thing Reculver is famous for is this is where Barnes Wallis tested the bouncing bomb in the 1940s in advance of the Dam Buster raids.
Yes, as I was saying to you earlier, watching the old 1950s film, I wonder whether some of that filming was actually done down here or whether they did it elsewhere. Somebody was telling me that they did some of the filming elsewhere to an area that looked very like effectively where the Wonsum Channel is, this bit between where the bombs were test dropped and then Barnes Wallis waded out into the sea in his rolled up trousers to try and find the pieces of the bomb to work out how to redesign it.
It's a fascinating bit of history because during the war, much of Thanet was evacuated. The schools were evacuated. Euston Airport, which is in the middle there, was obviously central to the war effort, but many people left during that period.
Good.
By the 17th century, the Wonsum Channel had silted up. But at the time of Henry Robinson, Thanet was still an island, and that seemed significant just to think about it in the terms of this rather extended period of history. We talk about a will from 1642. This whole area was flooded as recently as 1952, hence the seawall. It has also been actually the reason many locals have been questioning the logic of building large housing estates in the area.
So, David, can you explain to me what the Wonsum Channel was and what it meant, what it meant to the communities?
Sure. I mean, I can only really imagine it like anyone else at this stage. But for the communities on the island, Moncton, Birchington, St. Nicholas at Wade, Margate, Ramsgate, it must have meant a degree of separation from the mainland. Not complete isolation, because the channel could be crossed. But Thanet had a distinct identity, a self-contained world with its own rhythms, its own landowners, its own social structures. Today, it is somewhat affectionately known as Planet Thanet. And Henry Robinson was a product of that world. His family were island landowners. The community he felt responsible for, the people he left his trust for, were island people.
So the link to St John's College, Cambridge, surprises people. What would have motivated a Kentish landowner to leave land in trust to a university that's over 100 miles away?
Yeah, Marty. I mean, I think it surprised me when I was 8. But I think there are really 3 things here. First, Henry Robinson went there himself. He was educated at St John's College, so that connection was personal. It was not abstract. He knew the institution, and presumably he trusted it. Second, his father, Nicholas, left specific, explicit instructions, if you like, that his sons would receive a good university education. And Henry Robinson was therefore fulfilling something that presumably his father had set in motion, educational aspiration that ran through the family. Third, and this is where the Bletchenden connections matter, Henry's mother, Frances, married as her third husband, John Bletchenden. And the Bletchendens were one of the more prominent legal and landowning families of Kent. I think he was a justice of peace. They were lawyers, public figures. Henry grew up in a household that must have understood some of that: legal instruments, endowments, charitable trusts. The idea of using land to fund scholarships in perpetuity was not exotic to him. It was the language of his world, the language that his people spoke.
So does that tell us anything about the world and the family that he lived in?
Well, I think it tells us that they were serious people, probably not aristocracy as such. Henry Robinson describes himself as a gentleman, which, as I understand it, is a fairly precise social category in 1642. But he was educated, legally sophisticated, and connected to the institutions of public life. And crucially, I think they understood that that position carried some obligation. The will seems to me to be full of that instinct. He left land and funds to the widows, the poor, the servants, the scholars. Every bequest reflects the same idea. What you've been given, you pass on.
So, David, we also went to Saar. What are we actually looking at? The River Wonson. Is it this bit or that bit? I wonder which one it is.
Bit. It's that bit. That's the River Wonson.
That's the River Wonson.
That's the River Wonson. And so if we walk down here, having never been here before in my life, we...
Me neither.
Intrepid explorers past the stinging nettles.
Well, so there is Planet Thanet.
That is Planet Thanet.
That's Planet Thanet.
The edges of Planet Thanet.
And we're stood on jolly old England.
Yep, seems to be. And it would be quite interesting. Where is Reculver? Over? Right.
Must
see
be.
it,
Yeah, it must be over there somewhere.
But it's got to be sort of over there somewhere.
Yeah.
Yeah, we can't see it, but it must be. It must be.
You're not quite sure.
Yeah. And it's over there somewhere.
Over there. So there's a bit of.
And we can see St. Nicholas.
Undulating lands before we can see over there.
Yeah.
Cool. It's a bridge over Island Road there.
Yeah, so that side is Thanet. That is the road towards Canterbury, and the River Wonson flows this way across, presumably winding its way towards Richborough.
Yeah. And this historically would have all been underwater, wouldn't it?
All of it.
And if as people speculate today as to whether there's global warming, it potentially becomes flooded again. Who knows?
Who knows? Well, what we've seen is what remains of the Wonson Channel. This, I think you can call it a drainage ditch, basically, is what is left of the waterway that made Thanet an island for centuries. The channel silted up gradually from, I think, the medieval period onwards, and by the 17th century, it was already much reduced. And by the 19th century, it was certainly gone as a navigable waterway. And what you see here is basically the end of that process. But it must have been something that shaped the entire landscape, that defined the identity of these communities for over 1,000 years. Reduced to this, a little canal-ish. Ditch.
So there would have been a bridge here.
Yeah, Saar was a crossing point, and one of the few places the channel could be bridged, as I understand it. It controlled access to the island, and markets were held here. It had an importance that is completely invisible now. Saar is almost a hamlet, isn't it? And even Moncton is quite small. And Birchington is one of the bigger places today, but it wasn't back in Henry Robinson's day. But stand here and try to imagine the channel wide enough to require a bridge with boats using it and with the Isle of Thanet on the other side. That is the world that Henry Robinson moved through. And that world has gone so completely that people driving through Saar have no idea it ever existed. I mean, I can't imagine how many times I've driven down Island Road, as it is called, without quite realizing this.
So the channel silted up, the island became a peninsula. Things that seemed permanent turned out to not be so. Is that part of what this story is all about?
Yeah, I think it is. And I think it's a question I sort of keep on coming back too. The Wantsum Channel silted up naturally over a period of centuries. Nobody decided to end it. But actually, a charitable trust doesn't work like that. A charitable trust can't simply disappear because time has passed or because the landscape has changed around it. A charitable trust requires authority. It requires documentation. And in this case, it requires documentation that does not appear to exist.
So Birchington, as we know, gave England its first bungalows. Historically, we've got Rossetti is buried in Birchington. So it has a real identity.
So this is the tomb of Dante Gabriel Rossetti, who died in Birchington on the 9th of April, 1882. And this is his tomb. Ironically, he only lived in Birchington for a few months, but it is one of the things that Birchington is famous for, hosting Rossetti for a few months of his Glatterlian life.
Indeed, and there's Rossetti Road further down in Birchington, and you've got Rossetti Gardens, which is down by Christie's Wine Bar. When you look at who actually lived here, when you look at who actually lives here today, what do you see?
An interesting question, isn't it? Birchington is a genuinely distinctive place. The bungalows, the first purpose-built bungalows in England, developed in the 1860s and 1870s, gave Birchington an architectural identity that still shapes the village. You mentioned Rossetti. Dante Gabriel Rossetti is probably Birchington's most famous historical resident, even though he only lived here for a few months. He's buried, as you say, at All Saints' Church. Christina Rossetti lived here. She wrote In the Bleak Midwinter here. There is some real history here and real community pride in it. But the economic reality of Thanet today is much harder. Perhaps it was hard back in the day as well. There's limited local industry, limited employment opportunities. The demographic of Birchington is predominantly older people, many moving down here from the outskirts of South London when they retire. That creates a very specific property market and a very specific definition of affordable housing. The market rate isn't driven by local wages in Thanet and never has been. In my view, it's also one of the major problems with social and affordable housing provision in the local plan. The numbers, to my mind, simply don't stack up.
What do you mean by that?
Well, simply the main demographic of Birchington is retirees. And many of them move down here from South London, Bromley, Bexley, and so on when they retire. And that means the housing market in Birchington is driven by South London property prices at retirement. So someone who might be able to sell a 3-bedroom terrace house in Bexley for, 700,000 might spend half that, 350 on a bungalow here, or, if it's 800, 400, whatever, about 50%, right? And in simple terms, that's what it's been like for a few generations. Buy a nice place by the sea and retain enough in savings to fund your retirement. It's logical, it's rational, and it's a healthy thing to do. It's been happening for the best part of 100 years, or, maybe even longer since the railways came. So property prices in Birchington aren't really driven by affordability in Thanet. As I say, Thanet has limited industry, limited employment. And I don't really think the local plan took into account the economic reality of the area, or economic reality generally. And as I understand it, you may have greater clarity on this than me, but we're already seeing quite a few unsold properties in Westwood. that have been built, other parts of Thanet. Are they being bought by locals? No, because notwithstanding affordable housing provision, they're not affordable. So let's say 1,600 houses are built on this land. Who do they benefit? That question deserves a proper answer, and I think many local people have been asking that for ages. It's slightly outside the scope of what I've been working on. But it's safe to say that Henry Robinson understood that land, it carried responsibility to the community around it. And that concept, Marty, surely did not expire in 1643.
So why do figures like Henry Robinson get forgotten, David?
Well, I mean, I suppose partly because local history is underfunded, undervalued. Local archives exist. Kent County archives hold the original will. The evidence is there for anyone who wants to look at it or look for it. But looking takes time, and many people don't have the time. But also partly because the most recent and picturesque layer of history tends to obscure what's underneath. Birchington is known for bungalows and for Rossetti. These are genuinely interesting stories, but they sit on top of something older and, in legal terms, possibly more consequential. And partly, Marty, because I think people have no particular incentive to revisit those questions, and therefore no particular reason to do so.
But this isn't just about a field in Birchington, is it? What's the bigger principle at stake here?
No, it never was. It's not simply a planning question. It isn't just local history. In my view, it's a rule of law question. It's about a charitable trust created in 1642 with a public institution appointed as trustee. And no evidence the purpose was fulfilled. No evidence it was lawfully brought to an end. And that land may be held for this community being treated as private property without that question ever having been asked.
So what does the rule of law actually mean in this context then, Dave?
Well, it means that legal obligations do not expire simply because they become inconvenient. It means that a trustee, however prestigious, however ancient, however well-resourced, cannot simply decide to stop performing a trust because enough time has passed or because nobody has noticed. The rule of law means that the same rules apply to everyone. A small charity cannot simply ignore its obligations to its beneficiaries and carry on regardless. And neither, surely, can a large one. Henry Robinson used the legal instruments of his time precisely because he understood that the law would, or should at least, protect his intentions after his death. And so the question this case is asking is whether that understanding was justified, whether the law is actually does what it is supposed to do. That is the rule of law question at the heart of this case.
Freedom of information requests are supposed to make public institutions transparent. What did the FOI process reveal? Not just about this case, but how institutions respond when they are asked difficult questions.
Well, Marty, it's a great question. I think the FOI process revealed two things simultaneously. First, it revealed the evidence, the formal admissions, no scholarships, no termination authority, no original trust instrument. These admissions exist because the FOI system worked as it was designed to. A member of the public asked questions. An institution was legally required to answer them. And the answers are theirs in writing. But second, it revealed something about institutional behavior when the questions become difficult. My freedom of information requests followed a clear and logical sequence, each one built on the last, to St. John's College, to Thanet District Council, and to other authorities. Before long, though, these institutions, or at least many of them, started to find exemptions, so they didn't have to respond or could delay doing so. So my questions soon touched on things that clearly the institutions in question didn't really want anyone to investigate. Therefore, they tried to shut me down, or at the very least, slow me down. However, Marty, these matters are now being considered by the ICO and in court, so I think I'd better leave it there, if I may.
Absolutely. So as a little bit of a conclusion, where does this go now?
Well, where we want it to go. We have a judicial review claim before the High Court. We have active tribunal proceedings. We have a beneficiary register with people born in Thanet and Kent who may have a legal interest in the outcome. The investigation continues. There's no doubt more evidence to gather, more legal arguments to develop, maybe more institutions to hold to account. What I need, what this cause needs, is people. For example, people born in Thanet, born in Kent, to join the beneficiary register. People willing to support the legal challenge, however modestly. And people willing to share this story. Because the more people know about it, the harder, surely, hopefully, it becomes to ignore. So there's now a Facebook group, a YouTube channel, a beneficiary register, and we also have a GoFundMe. I'm very happy to talk to the community, obviously carefully, due to the various legal proceedings, in order to raise awareness. I'm delighted to speak to you today, Marty, but I'm also delighted to have been asked to judge Birchington's Scarecrow competition on Saturday, alongside Sir Roger Gale, MP, and an elected member of Birchington Parish Council. I don't think it's you, is it? But I think one of the other members of the Birchington Parish Council will also be there. So that's fantastic. Look, in the short term, this is about planning permission on a field in Birchington, but it has wider and even national implications. So let's see what happens. Henry Robinson made a promise to the people of Thanet in 1642, and what we hope to do and intend to do is make sure that it is kept.
David, thank you very much for being on Peace Unplugged today. This, as we say, is a very, very important question for the local people of Birchington, and could potentially be very much an important question for people in other parts of the country who may be in similar circumstances. That we don't know, and that we'll wait and see. But it's been a pleasure chatting with you and talking with you. This has been Peace Unplugged. I'm Marty, and this is David Peerless. Thank you for your time today.
Thank you for hosting me. It's been a real pleasure. I've really enjoyed doing this with you. Thank you.
And we're at Rossetti Road, which is close to the railway bridge. So, David, what's the connection of Rossetti to this bridge?
Well, I don't know. I think there's a plaque on a house down there, which I think represents the site that the Rossettis lived. But the importance of the railway is that it was built during the 1860s and connected this area to really the world, I guess, to London, and it started to attract people to move down here. And it's when Birchington essentially opened up.
And we were discovering the significance of the hymn tune, the carol, in the bleak midwinter.
Yes, Christina Rossetti wrote in one of the most famous Christmas carols in the bleak midwinter in Birchington.
Fascinating.
So possibly because of those cold northerly Siberian winds. So here we are along the seafront, and one of the other things that Birchington was known for back in the day, in the 1800s, was smuggling tea and so on and so forth. And these little caves, when my father was a child in Birchington, they were all open and you could play in them.
Amazing. Yes, it was, as I did on a previous podcast, about the story of the smuggler Daniel Fagg, whose boats likely landed on this seafront. And this is, as I've said before, one of my favourite places to be because it is so beautifully peaceful.